All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute's Foster Youth Internship Congressional Briefing on the recently published report called Raising Our Voices. It's on the screens over here, so it's recommendations for policymakers to support the well-being for children and youth in foster care. My name is Kate McLean, and I'm Executive Director of CCAI. CCAI is a nonprofit entity of the largest bipartisan bicameral caucus in the U.S. Congress. There are over 140 members of Congress in this 118th Congress that work to bring about legislative change for vulnerable children and families both in the United States and around the world. Both CCAI and the CCA are dedicated towards permanency, strengthening families, and bipartisanship. One of CCAI's signature programs is the Foster Youth Internship Program. This is a congressional internship for individuals who've experienced the U.S. foster care system. It began in 2003 as an opportunity for policymakers to hear directly from those with lived experience on their ideas for change. While participating in congressional office summer internships, our advocates also spend their weekends reading and researching federal policy, oftentimes rooted in their own lived experience. This allows them to publish a federal policy report that brings us today in front of Congress to learn and hear from them on all their amazing ideas for reform of the U.S. Foster care system. Next week, they'll also be presenting to the administration at the White House. They'll be at the Department of Health and Human Services and the private sectors to share their knowledge far and wide. CCAI exists to bridge the gap between congressional leaders, advocates, policy influencers, foundations, child welfare and adoption professionals, and service providers. As a convener, CCAI brings together voices of lived experience and expertise to the halls of Congress to influence change. When members of Congress can hear directly from those who are impacted by these systems, they are able to engage and bring about legislative change. Without further delay, I'm honored to introduce today's 12 leaders, the authors of this report: Gianna, Naomi, Jessica, Mari, Agozi, Eunice, Idalia, Isabel, Kayleen, Faith, Christian, and Glenda. These talented leaders come from California to Virginia, coast to coast, and many states in between. They bring with them varied but equally impressive backgrounds of advocacy, volunteering, and professional experiences. We hope you are inspired by these experts and their ideas and solutions for change. I'd now like to introduce Agozi McDonald and Christian Sotomayor to give us some opening remarks.
Thank you to everyone attending today's briefing regarding policy disconnects within the child welfare system. We hope the halls of Rayburn were not too confusing to navigate, because we still get lost from time to time, and it's our second month here. My name is Agozi McDonald.
And my name is Christian Sotomayor. We represent the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute as this year's 2023 Foster Youth Internship Cohort. My colleagues and I are here today because each one of our lives has been shaped and impacted by our involvement within the child welfare system. Although we come from an intricate and diverse web of experiences, we stand before you today, united, as a singular voice seeking change for a system that desperately needs it. Through vocalizing our lived experiences and utilizing our platform, we hope to improve the lives of all impacted by the system.
Throughout the course of these past weeks, each one of us has worked tirelessly to develop potential recommendations for policy disconnects we, ourselves, have experienced in interacting with the child welfare system. To gain valuable insight into the legislative processes, we were placed into a congressional office. In our pursuit of addressing these policy gaps, we have collectively met with a variety of stakeholders across the child welfare system to ensure that the policies developed were probable and effective.
After participating in this program, we believe that only in addressing, amending, and rectifying the child welfare system's fundamental flaws can we make a significant difference in the lives of many. This is why we come to you today, not simply as a group of young people with inflated dreams, but as experts with lived experiences and measurable policy recommendations.
While we understand that many of you have dedicated countless years to this cause, we only hope that you'll be receptive to our stories, perspectives, and recommendations. We hope you are inspired to want to make a change in the lives of those impacted by the system and strive towards reforming it. Following all 12 individual remarks, we invite you to ask any questions you have regarding the specific policy recommendations. Our hope is that our stories reignite a desire to continue to do your work in your space while giving you a real-life perspective and introducing you to new issues that may not be on your horizon. But please remember, we are not here as 12 individual voices, but to amplify the voices of all current and former foster youth across this nation.
So this is why we ask you, when you listen today, listen mindfully, listen intentionally. I'd now like to introduce our first presenter, Gianna Bottom.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gianna Bottom. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to be here today. Approximately 80% of foster youth struggle with mental health issues. Today, you are looking at someone who was and is part of that statistic. However, I would like to show you how that statistic is not a number here, but a child, a teen, and now young adult's life. I entered the foster care system when I was 6 years old because I experienced environments of neglect, drugs, abuse, and rape in my home. With every slap, with every cut, with every scar, with every time I was forced to watch a woman beg for mercy and be stripped of her dignity, as I witnessed the orange liquid in that syringe turn the people around me into those I would never recognize. My childhood innocence was being taken from me. My first placement was in kinship care, where I was subject to the same environment I was taken from, and my only friend was the empty hunger I felt day in and day out. My next placement, I was taken hours away to an environment that had no familiarity to me, and I was more isolated and confused about what was happening to me than ever before. I struggled coping with my experiences, which resulted in PTSD, depression, and just pure anger. But I didn't feel like I had the supports that knew how to help me. I was consistently told I was not better than the life I was born into, and I was a lost cause. When I was adopted, the struggle with my mental health continued well past physically escaping my biological home and foster placement traumas, as what I experienced, I will never truly get over. My foster turned adoptive parents, my mom and dad now, created a nurturing environment. However, they were not properly prepared to help me overcome my traumas and resorted to the limited availability for therapists in my area. This is when I realized they had not been properly prepared to help with the preconditioned traumas that come with adopting or fostering a child. In light of this, I am recommending Congress to mandate the development of a federally funded, standardized training program to be required of all adoptive and foster parents that includes training regarding the coping mechanisms, de-escalation techniques, mental health types, first aid, and intervention techniques related to youth mental health. In addition to the initial training prior to any first placement, all foster parents must take a refresher course annually to be able to continue to foster. Secondly, I urge Congress to direct the Children's Bureau with Health and Human Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and other relevant federal agencies to develop this training in consultation with a panel of mental health professionals, child welfare advocates, former foster youth, foster and adoptive parents, and other experts in the field. Lastly, Congress should mandate that the training module be updated by the mental health professional panel every 3 years to ensure it reflects current best practices, evidence-based approaches designed to meet the unique needs of this population. I can't tell you how many times I am now told how resilient I was and to look where I am today. But it wasn't resilience that got me here. It was pure survival. Over 400,000. That is the number of how many youth are fighting to survive the system as we sit in this room today. The number doesn't even come close to the amount struggling to maintain survival after adoption, aging out, and extended care. I implore you all to consider these recommendations because the survival of our country's children depends on you, on all of us. Statistics within foster care is more than just a number. It's a life. Thank you.
100% of the children entering the foster care system due to dependency and neglect cases have experienced at least one traumatic event in their lives: the removal from their family. My name is Naomi Davis, and I'm here today to talk to you about why post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD training, for foster and kinship parents before they become foster parents is vital to aid permanency within the system. I entered foster care at the age of 6 after my mom passed away and was reunited with my father when I was 8. 10 years later, I re-entered the system at the age of 16 and aged out when I was 18. I experienced abuse and neglect from my father and stepmother for years, which led to my diagnosis of complex PTSD. This is a type of PTSD that 90% of foster youth have because it does not come from a single traumatic event, but from years of traumatic events. The abuse resulted in me being separated from my siblings and one of my brothers and I being placed to live with a friend's family, where we stayed for a little under 2 years. My foster parents had children of their own, including a daughter my age, who was my best friend at the time. This was considered a kinship placement, and because my foster parents knew us before being placed with them, they received no training on PTSD and its behavioral effects, a standard that does not exist anyway. While there is a federal requirement that foster parents receive basic training prior to placement, there's no mandate requiring that those trainings include education on PTSD. As a result, there's tremendous variation state by state as to what is required by caregivers. For example, Alabama requires 30 hours of trauma-informed training, where Arizona only requires 6 hours of basic training. Due to this lack of training, my new caregivers struggled with my brothers and I's resistance towards authority. Admittedly, I did not think that I needed to be parented since I'd been raising myself and my siblings for years. I now know that much of my attitude resulted from my past trauma and lack of stable connections, something my foster parents did not have the tools to recognize, the training to recognize, or the tools to manage. Over time, my trauma also brought out unresolved trauma within my foster parents' family, and through therapy, it became clear that our traumas overlapped and exacerbated one another. This led to my kinship placement failing, and our foster parents felt unprepared to care for my brother and I, despite them having the best intentions. Their feelings of unpreparedness are not uncommon within the system, as 30 to 50% of foster parents do not continue fostering after a year because of these feelings. PTSD creates trauma reactions that can be hard for not only foster parents to understand, but for the youth as well. There's a cycle where a youth experiences a trauma, they get placed with a new family, and either lash out or draw inward, refusing to connect to or trust anyone. This behavior can be very confusing for foster parents who are unaware of the impact that childhood trauma has on a youth, which is why education and training before a foster placement is made is the key to creating stable and lasting environments where relationships and connections can grow. In the 115th Congress, the Trauma-Informed Care Act was introduced, which sought to implement trauma-informed training for school and court personnel as well as medical providers. To better support foster youth and foster parents in combating the problem of instability, Congress must amend and reintroduce the bill to include a federal mandatory minimum of 25 hours of pre-foster parent PTSD training, which must be renewed by them once a year. For the training to be effective, it must infuse the voices of those with experience and expertise. The amended bill should also allocate resources to provide effective trauma-informed training therapy for youth while in their placement. The downward spiral of failed connections between youth and their foster placements can be prevented through the implementation of these recommendations. Thank you.
My name is Jessica Herrera Twitchell, a name that is not mine legally because of a choice I made as a teenager. As a teenager, I was faced with this life-changing decision between permanency and an education. I chose an education. I knew being adopted might provide me with more long-term stability, but I also knew that college would be a financial burden for my foster parents. No child should ever have to experience the feeling of choosing between a permanent family or a post-secondary education. The harsh truth is that adoption and reunification has economic barriers. In post-reunification, children are mostly no longer eligible for federal services, including support for post-secondary education. Data shows, however, the families are in need of these resources post-adoption, with 93% of parents relying on adoption subsidies to help meet the child's needs. Access to post-secondary services are limited in the Acts, Federal Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoption Acts of 2008, and the John H. Chafee Foster Care Independent Act of 1999. The problem with access is that the requirements are variable. For the Chafee grant, most states allow youth between the ages of 16 to 18 to qualify for ETV. However, this exception is not a requirement for all states. In the case of extended foster care, eligibility requirements also vary by state. Some states extend resources to any foster youth who was in the system between the ages of 16 to 18, while others require you to be 18. Assistance like this is important for reaching successful permanency for youth. 1 year of extended foster care increases the probability of going to college between 5 to 12%. I stand before you today as one of those foster youths. I was able to graduate from UCLA with a history major and double minors in Latin American Studies and Education Studies. But I should have never had to sacrifice a family for an education. This is why it becomes important for every child to have access to post-secondary education services. All children should have the right to a successful permanency. A successful permanency includes the ability to access education and the financial ability to obtain it. Therefore, my first recommendation is to expand extended foster care to allow youth ages 16 to 18 in all states who have been adopted or reunified to participate in extended foster care. My second recommendation is to expand the education and training voucher program to allow youth 13 to 18 to participate in all states so that youth in the system have equitable access to education. You have the power to ensure that no other youth like me continues to agonize over deciding between family and an education. Thank you for your time.
$160. That is what I received per month when I was living in a group home. It's not sustainable for anyone to live off of. So I began searching for a job. However, many of the jobs surrounding my group home only needed night shift workers. And if we didn't meet the curfew, police would be called on us. So we could not take the surrounding area's jobs, nor could we try to make a more sustainable wage. When I entered foster care, none of my family members or close community had the financial resources to take me in. Not because they didn't desire to, but because they couldn't afford to. My name is Jamari Kane White, and I spent 3 years in congregate care. Congregate care encompasses group homes, institutions, residential treatment centers, and other out-of-home settings. In my personal experience, congregate care should not be considered as a plan A for any child in the foster care system. This type of care leaves a lot of room for children to fall through the cracks and be left behind into the gray areas. They become out of sight, out of mind. After I entered my group home, even my social worker had stopped checking in on me as frequently, believing I was better taken care of. this was absolutely not the case. At minimum, 10% of all youth in each state are in institutional homes. In some states, the percentage of youth in institutions is over 30%. The Department of Health and Human Services found that over 40% of youth in congregate care did not have a clinical reason for replacement in such an acute setting. We should be prioritizing kinship placements by redirecting funds from institutionalized settings and rerouting more money into kinship payments and resources, while extending kinship to even include family, friends, and community members. There are very few supports available for kinship caregivers to access if they need help. The Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program is one of the few supports available for kinship caregivers. However, only 12% of kinship caregivers receive TAMP funding. This study also found that housing support was received by only 6% of voluntary kinship caregivers and 9% of formal kinship caregivers, and just over half of voluntary and formal kinship caregivers even receive food assistance to begin with. Every youth shouldn't have a traumatizing story to tell from the experience in foster care. We can mitigate youth trauma and their exposure to traumatizing events simply by trying our hardest to keep them with their families or even in their sentimental environments, if that's where they would like to be. Congress should make efforts to keep children with their families, rather than focusing the majority of funding services that mitigate damages when the child does enter the system. To help families stay together through kinship caregivers, Congress should create a kinship caregiver tax credit to allow more kin caregivers to care for children outside the child welfare system and prevent the need for foster care altogether. Congress should build on the reforms made by the Family First Prevention Services Act and further restrict group care settings under the Title IV-E program. And lastly, Congress should promote models like DC 127, which support grandparents and other kin caregivers with resources to keep children out of the system. DC 127 is a church network and supports foster families and recruits them. My experience is not just my own. Hundreds of children can sit right here and give you a version of the same story. Congregate care, if necessary, should only be used when there are truly no options left, not as an undisputed plan. Let's keep the true goal of child welfare in mind, which is doing what's in the child's best interest. And even though I did not reunify with my family, I cannot stress how grateful I will always be for my adopted family and my two beautiful baby sisters. When it comes down to it, which will you choose? Proper kinship care or laissez-faire institutionalized care? Thank you.
Thank you for coming. My name is Agozi Mohammed McDonald, and I have interned in Senator Ron Wyden's office. Roughly 12 years ago, I was placed into foster care. The events were, of course, traumatic. But what I remember the most was the last thing I said to my mom before she was taken away from me and later deported. It was a promise that I would carry out her dreams, which are for me to attend the best college possible. This is a weird dream. Most 10-year-old kids could not care less about college. But this was because I was fortunate. My biological parents were highly educated individuals. Thus, I had the privilege of being raised in a household where I was constantly drilled with the importance of education. Therefore, despite not knowing a word of English as a first-generation immigrant and being raised in a foster family with no knowledge about the college processes, I searched for opportunities. I understood that the public schools education system available to me at that moment was hardly the best one. And at just 13 years old, I personally requested my foster mother to transfer me to a nearby charter school, a life-changing choice. Once there, my early dreams of college ensured that I would not let the lack of resources be a barrier. I banged on the doors of every opportunity possible and attended my dream institution of Georgetown University, where I graduated this past May. Throughout all this, I learned one thing. Chasing the college dream as a foster youth is incredibly difficult. There are many barriers for foster youth to attend college. First is the cost, whether through financial burden or lack of knowledge. As it stands, there is no direct line of funds for education for foster youth. There's a general Pell Grant for those who display exceptional financial need, but it is not nearly enough for youth who only rely on themselves to pay for college. Thus, one possibility is for congressional action is the creation of a separate grant program allocated straight to colleges and available only for foster youth to encourage greater and more equitable access to higher education. There's also a severe lack of educational resources available to foster families and social workers. They need to be better equipped with information regarding education to better support the youth in their care. Thus, Congress should direct the Department of Education to create a pamphlet or other means of up-to-date information regarding the college processes and secondary institutional choice. The effects can be tremendous. From my own research, I learned that just about every top school in the country provides 100% need-based aid, which meant that when I had entered Georgetown, it was guaranteed that they would cover all costs needed to attend. Basic knowledge on available higher education supports, including need-based aid, is not widely known amongst individuals who have experienced foster care. And this lack of knowledge prevents many from even trying to apply to schools altogether. Lastly, there must be more strict, uniform guidelines. One major funding stream that Congress has enacted is the CHAFE program. However, CHAFE does not create specific services or guarantee who receives them. Thus, there's a high variability and disparity state to state in how states use these funds, such as age cutoffs, lack of grant availability, or unequal distribution. Congress should replicate successful evaluated programs, such as the Massachusetts Outreach Program, which is a state organization of social workers tasked with the sole purpose to help youth transition into adulthood. Some highlights of this program and what it does well for national replication is having a contact specialist trained in adolescent development that remains with the young person for an extended period of time. They provide individualized goal planning and responsive services, and a focus on self-determination. Though these changes may sound a bit too large, any step towards it may be another foster youth graduating from a secondary institution. Thank you.
Gotta shake out. Can you hear me? Okay, I gotta just shake out all the jitters. Bit nervous. Bear with me. Okay. Hello, my name is Eunice Mijedu. From what I can remember, I have always feared the truth. Because for me, the truth came with consequences and pain. Pain that left me beaten and abused and hollow. That's why I often don't tell the truth. But for today, I will tell you my truth. A truth that birthed my depression, anxiety, and insecurities. What is trafficking? If you would have asked me as a child, I would have said, trafficking is when a weird man in a white van takes you and sells you to strangers. I could not have imagined that it could occur in the basement of my church or inside homes and facilities with the words, "All children are safe here." How ironic. These strange men were not strangers, but family and friends. They were doctors, teachers, students, pastors, and so much more. I was a child pleading with the adults around me that something was not right at home. After years of pleading with social workers, my voice went unheard, and soon I found myself heavily drugged in a basement in Sterling, Virginia, with other kids just like me. How could this happen? How did this happen? Why did this happen? While I had those questions at the time, the question today is how you plan to fix it. First, before anything, I urge you to read my policy report, because I am the spitting image of the 60% of trafficking victims with child welfare involvement. Let me repeat that again. I am the spitting image of the 60% of trafficking victims with child welfare involvement. To Congress, I urge you to reevaluate the national definition of trafficking based on the analysis provided in my research. The second is for Congress to amend the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, CAPTA, by mandating a state's CAPTA plan to 1. Include proper trafficking screening training for child welfare agencies, utilizing screening tools provided by organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics. The second, switching from a guardian ad litem to legal advocate representative who uphold attorney-client privilege within childcare, which not only amplifies youth voices, but builds trust within the system. These are the small steps Congress can take to combat trafficking in the child welfare system. And if these steps were taken, maybe I wouldn't be so afraid to tell the truth. Thank you.
What if we had a system designed where youth voices are heard, policies are shaped by the people they affect, and lived experience is the driving force behind systems change? My name is Idalia Robinson-Confer, and I'm a dedicated advocate who believes systems change is possible when young people with lived experience are heard and valued. Today, I will share the importance of expanding opportunities for youth in decision-making and the importance of permanent connections. At the age of 13, I entered the foster care system due to the passing of my great-grandparents who had been my caregivers for most of my life. Reunification was not an option for me due to parental incarceration and parental substance abuse. I later lost my mother to substance abuse. After 8 years in the foster care system, I aged out and found transitioning out of foster care difficult. I struggled with decision-making, self-advocacy, emotional regulation, and building and maintaining relationships. I lacked permanent connections, and too often my case planning did not feel personalized. Caseworkers unintentionally prioritized what they believed was best for me without fully understanding my unique circumstances or involving me in decision-making. Their approach seemed centered around a check-the-box mentality, focusing on completing procedural requirements rather than truly understanding my needs, goals, and aspirations. While healing from the trauma of my foster care experiences is ongoing work, I discovered the power of advocacy and the significance of having supportive adults. I was introduced to the term authentic youth engagement through my involvement on a youth action board in Western Pennsylvania. Authentic youth engagement emphasizes the meaningful participation of young individuals in decision-making processes that directly impacts their lives. It's much more than showing up to share our stories and traumas. It creates a space where young voices are heard, valued, and involved in planning, developing, and implementing programs and policies. It includes compensation, training opportunities, and youth-adult partnerships. Using the youth engagement model, our Youth Action Board advocated and secured $3.7 million in youth homelessness demonstration program funding, a HUD program designed to make youth homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. We made significant advancements, including expanding housing options, smaller staff ratios, case conferencing among youth-serving systems, creating peer support positions, prioritizing lived experience over formal education on job postings, and expanding trauma-informed training. This demonstrates the impactful results that come from engaging and valuing the voice of young people when they are actively included in shaping their futures. Advocacy opportunities have provided a platform for me to share my unique perspectives, insights, and knowledge which I lacked during my time in foster care. It has given me a sense of agency, ownership, and opportunity to make a difference. I have built confidence and developed leadership skills such as public speaking, research, and effective communication, all valuable assets to my education and professional career. The adult partners and mentors I've connected with through advocacy efforts and community connections have significantly impacted my transition out of foster care. They have been there to provide letters of recommendations, connect me to resources, offer advice and encouragement, and celebrate my achievements. There is no better feeling than knowing I have a support system that believes in me. I'm proud to share that I'm here today with a bachelor's degree pursuing a master's in public administration at the University of Pittsburgh on a full academic scholarship. This would not be possible without the support and resources that have contributed to my personal and professional growth. Unfortunately, these resources are not available to all young people. Each year, 20,000 individuals age out of foster care. Many youth exit foster care with fewer supportive relationships when they enter and are excluded from decision-making, directly impacting their lives. The current outcomes of youth aging out include a higher risk of housing instability, involvement with the criminal justice system, mental health challenges, and financial insecurity. Our current approach is ineffective. Youth transitioning to adulthood are developmentally at a stage where they must shape their identities, learn about decision-making, and build healthy relationships. When young people are not actively engaged in shaping their own lives, it leads to inadequate solutions that fall short of addressing their needs. Youth should not have to fight for their voices to be heard. We are responsible for building a system that empowers and uplifts our youth, recognizing that they are the experts of their own lives. That's why I strongly recommend the following measures to ensure that our system truly reflects the needs and aspirations of young individuals. First, the federal government should embed youth engagement and decision-making by creating meaningful opportunities for youth with lived experience to advise federal agencies in their policy development and administration. Next, the federal government should provide guidance and require states to ensure that child welfare agencies engage youth in decision-making regarding their own lives and planning for their future. Last, increase funding and support for mentoring programs tailored to youth aging out of foster care. It must require collaboration with youth to identify potential permanent connections, including supportive adults, mentors, family, or chosen family members who can offer ongoing guidance and support beyond their time in foster care. To conclude, I would like to thank CCAI, Senator Crapo, and his office for giving me this incredible opportunity and for their support this summer. I would not be here today without the support of my former CASA advocate, Flo Jenkins, and my kinship family, Dana and Keith. I also want to acknowledge some of my mentors and supporters that I have worked with in advocacy spaces that are here today. Thank you, Sierra, Dan, Andrew, Liam, Barbara. Your support today means the world to me. I'm proud to be here today for those who do not have a seat at the table and for the generations to come in the foster care system. Thank you.
Brothers and sister, forever and ever. We are family. No one can take that away. Love you. My name is Isabel Rodriguez, and those are the words of my brother written on a card he made for me for my 14th birthday, which I have chosen to share with you all today. It wasn't until after I turned 18 that I was given this card. I went over 4 years without ever reading the words of a loving brother. Today marks day 2,540 for my time in foster care. And in all of this time, I have seen my brother twice. One of those times being when he looked at me and said he could not bring himself to call me his sister. The most challenging moment of my life was looking into the eyes of a child I once shared inside jokes with and being told that I left him behind to suffer. All because the system deprived us of communication. The bond we had as children was taken from us, destroyed, because the child welfare system did not do enough to protect it. Therefore, I am here today to tell you all how much I loved my brother, how much I still do, and how detrimental it has been to our relationship to have been separated and denied communication. What is worse is that my story is not uncommon. I am among more than 330,000 foster youth presently separated from their siblings. Like the majority of all foster youth, over 440,000, I will age out this year without having any permanent connections, without a flourishing relationship with my brother. Like 75% of foster youth, That is the result of sibling separation. Silverstein and Smith, two researchers on sibling relationships, wrote, "Even with later reunion, the damage may indeed be so deep as to prevent the complete healing for the sibling relationship." That is our fate. I will have to spend the rest of my life accepting that what is often the longest relationship of any individual's life has been stripped from me. And I know I am not alone in this reality. In fact, 5 years ago, a former foster youth intern stood here and advocated for preventing sibling separation. And yet here we are, 5 years later, still raising this rampant concern. It is heartbreaking that we are failing to acknowledge that the sacred sibling connections of foster youth can never be replaced in lieu of external aid. Congress must not allow a system under their jurisdiction to sever sibling relationships. The government is the parent for foster youth and therefore has the duty to protect relationships of such profound significance. Congress must pass the Protecting Sibling Relationships in Foster Care Act of 2023, H.R. 755, a bill that establishes a pilot grant program for the development of a specialized foster care for sibling groups. Congress must incentivize states and child welfare agencies to expand the recruitment of foster homes for large sibling groups and retain these homes for large sibling groups. And Congress must request a U.S. Government Accountability Office report that holds all states and child welfare agencies responsible and accountable for their part in protecting the most sacred connections a child could ever have. Thank you.
Kaylin Brown, a victim of child abuse in the foster care system, states that it's not common for a kid to catch an STD as young as I did. She then states, I caught my first STD when I was 5. If that doesn't make you sick to your stomach, I don't know what will. If this isn't a clear enough picture to policymakers that our current foster care system is broken and continues to fail thousands of children yearly, I don't know what will. Although this quote is incredibly bold and hard to digest, these are many of the stories that current foster youth face in our system right now. Although I have been fortunate enough to not have experienced this is unfortunately not the case for many children in the system. My name is Kayleen Shapiro, and I am here today to address the issue of child abuse and neglect within the foster care system. Around 400,000 kids are in foster care at any given moment. 44% of these kids are placed in foster homes, 35% are placed with relatives, and 9% are placed in group homes. Johns Hopkins University stated that children living in group homes were 28 times more likely to experience abuse than other children. Additionally, foster children in Maryland were 4 times more likely to experience sexual abuse than their peers who were not in foster care. In 2020 alone, of children who were abused and neglected while in foster care, 3 out of every 4 victims suffered neglect, 16% were physically abused, 9% were sexually assaulted, 6% were mentally abused, and 2% were medically neglected. Some states have established ombudsman offices to investigate abuse and put pressure on the child welfare agencies to fix systematic problems in an effort to protect children who are in foster care. A conflict of interest may arise since some of these ombudsman offices are based within the child welfare system, while others are not. The Foster Children Bill of Rights, which highlights important rights that children have in care, has been adopted in some form by at least 15 states. The provision of legal representation for foster children has arguably had the biggest impact on states' effort to safeguard children from abuse. At least 16 states have taken steps to guarantee that foster youth have access to attorneys, not volunteers, to ensure that their rights are completely upheld. Studies show that when foster youth have access to legal representation, the likelihood of permanent placement, reuniting with their relatives, or moving into an adoptive home increases by at least 40%. As a Black woman in America today, knowing my rights and having access to legal counsel has opened countless doors for me and given me a space where my voice can be validated and heard. Thus, legal representation is vital for foster youth, for it will provide them with an understanding of their legal rights, give them assurance that authorities will respond if they report being in danger, and give them a voice in their own lives. With the current way our foster care system is, I think we can all agree that it is in dire need of work. Although this task seems incredibly daunting and hard to fix, the time for action is now. The longer we wait to take initiative, the more children suffer in silence. Therefore, I believe Congress should provide every child in foster care with access to legal representation by an attorney, request a Government Accountability Office report to learn more about the abuse taking place in foster homes, and expand federal funding to establish ombudsman offices in every state to improve the safety of every child in foster care. Together, we can truly make a difference. Thank you.
March 12th, 2020, I turned 21 and aged out of the foster care system. March 17th, 2020, the state of Missouri started the COVID-19 lockdown, and soon after, I was homeless and couch surfing. My story is not unique, but a reality for many youth who experience the foster care system. An estimated 20% of young adults who are in foster care become homeless the day they age out. Nationwide, half the homeless population spent time in foster care. Hello, my name is Faith Alexandria Sharp. I'm a former foster youth and an advocate for policy change. During my 6 years in foster care, I moved over 10 times. Each transition made it harder to move, added new trauma, and damaged many relationships beyond repair. While I found myself with a robust support system, no matter how much someone believed in me, they couldn't provide me with the one thing I needed, a place of my own. To this day, I still worry about housing instability and feel uncomfortable making choices that might threaten it. Once I have a lease on an apartment, I begin worrying about the next one and all that process entails. This past year was the first time in my adult life living in the same place for 2 consecutive years. I developed a bond with my neighbors, which made my place feel like home. With this support and stability, my grades, mental health, and overall comfort in life improved. The reality for many is that within 2 years of leaving care, researchers estimate that over 40% of youth aging out will experience housing instability. However, there are limited resources specifically designed to ensure all youth aging out of care have access to stable housing. 2 programs that are designed to help youth in these transitional phases are John H. Chafee Foster Care Program and the Foster Youth to Independence Housing Choice Vouchers. However, they often do not fully meet the needs or have enough funding to support all youth. Furthermore, not all former foster youth who experience homelessness are those who have aged out of the foster care system. Many are youth who achieve permanency through adoption or reunification. When someone has achieved permanency through adoption and reunification, it does not mean that there are still lingering effects of trauma from their time in care. This population of former foster youth is often unable to participate in these housing programs because it is an assumption that they are set up for success and have the supports they need to achieve such things. Supporting all transition-aged youth with critical supports, such as housing, has a strong return on investment. It increases their incomes and savings and decreases contact with the criminal justice system. Investing in foster youth in early adulthood is an investment in getting youth out of long-term entitlement programs and into the workforce on a path to success and stability. It is in my recommendation that Congress increase funding for the Chafee program to meet the needs of all former foster youth, and to amend Title IV-E to expand the Chafee program eligibility and request that HUD expand the FYI housing choice voucher eligibility to include those who have achieved permanency but lack the resources to successfully gain independence. To prevent the foster care to homelessness pipeline and increase stability, of those who have been involved in the foster care system. I want to finish by thanking Chairman Smith and the whole staff on the Committee of Ways and Means for getting to be a part of the amazing work they do and getting to witness all of it. I also want to thank Cheryl and Belle for being here today and for their amazing support, and just the environment that they create is fantastic. I also want to just thank everyone in this room for all the hard work that goes behind the scenes to make change happen, because we all in this room are capable of being change makers. I also want to thank my chosen family and the staff at One Simple Wish for believing in me and always reminding me to bring joy. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Faith. And as she shared, she interned this summer with the Ways and Means Committee, who's our host today. But we actually have a Ways and Means Committee member in the room. So this provided a great segue to introduce Congressman Danny K. Davis of Illinois' 7th Congressional District. Mr. Davis has been in Congress since 1996 and has been an amazing champion for families. So Mr. Davis, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And let me tell you, there's nothing like having a full house, especially if you know about poker. This is not poker, but it's just as good and it's just as great and it's even better. I was so delighted when I walked in and saw so many people here. And I thought that was one of the best possible signs that you could have. Having a focus, having an interest, being engaged in the whole idea of helping to make life better for someone else, providing a stable home, stable environment, a place that individuals may have never had, for individuals in need of adoption, I think is one of the best focuses that this Congress of the United States of America could have. And so I want to thank all of those who are associated in any way, shape, form, or fashion. You know, a home, and home is where the heart is. Being a part of something beyond self, beyond the individuality, and then being organized, coordinated, using influence, doing it together, and enjoying it all the while. I am just so delighted that I had an opportunity to stop by and say congratulations, to say thank you, and to say keep believing in ourselves, keep believing in you, keep believing and knowing that yesterday is gone, tomorrow is coming along, and we're going to make it everything that it really ought to be. So it's good to be here. I like to end things with a little positive saying that I love to hear, and that is life becomes for each and every one of us whatever it is that we would endeavor to make life be. The poet said it this way: I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged at evening time when I counted my scanty store. But I found that life is a just employer. He gives you what you ask, but once you have set the wages, then you must bear the task. I worked for a meaningless hire, a penny, only to learn dismayed that whatever price I had asked of life, life would have willingly paid. Congratulations. Thank you so very much, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, Congressman Davis, for being with us today. Both he and his awesome staffer, Jill, who's here, hosted one of our FYIs, Kayleen Shapiro from Illinois in their office. So thank you for providing that opportunity and always uplifting youth voice in Congress. So thank you for that. We'll now resume our remarks, and I'll welcome Christian Sotomayor up to the podium.
I have always thought of education as an escape from the hardships I've experienced in my life. From being involved in the child welfare system at an early stage of my life to experiencing adversity as a result of my low income, first generation Mexican American identity. I have been predestined with the disposition to struggle. Naively, I imagined the day that I got to a university, like the University of California, Berkeley, I would have made it. I now, in my 4th year attending the school, realize I couldn't have been further from the truth. The daunting reality is that hardships foster youth face throughout their lives do not end with the college acceptance. My undergraduate years have been considerably different from that of many of my peers who grew up in traditional family environments. Where my peers have been able to obtain high grades, cultivate connections with professors, and enjoy their undergraduate years, I have struggled. I have struggled not because I am any less capable or driven. I've struggled because I have not had the same access to support and resources that they have. The combination of financial burdens like tuition, food, housing, strained my mental health and made it challenging for me to succeed in the classroom. Where many of my peers' greatest challenge was passing a test, my mind and time were preoccupied with how I would pay the expenses compounding on my desk. In a desperate attempt to seek help, I found the John H. Chafee Grant, a federal funding program designed to help youth who have experience in the foster care system with their transition to adulthood. I was disheartened when I learned I was ineligible. The reason? Exiting the foster care system and being reunited with my family before I reached the age of 16. I spent 2 years of my life in the foster care system, but I continued to endure its lingering effects to this day. I was reunified into a home that could not afford to help me pursue my educational dreams. This one condition is the reason youth in my position cannot receive the help or support they need. Existing funding programs like Chafee fail to consider that even after finding permanency in reunification or adoption, people who have experienced foster care continue to experience hardships. They struggle, they need help, and they need support and resources to thrive. Foster youth, despite wanting to pursue higher education, aren't equipped with the proper resources or support to navigate these higher institutions. That is why only 3 to 5% of foster youth obtain their bachelor's degrees. Many are susceptible to encountering educational setbacks resulting from poverty, homelessness, food insecurity, poor mental health, incarceration, and suicide. Unlike many in my position, I had the opportunity to connect with Berkeley Hope Scholars, a local program created to provide assistance to youth in need of support who have experienced the foster care system. Berkeley Hope Scholars provided me with the exact resources I needed to succeed. This wide range of critical support, mentoring, tutoring, purchasing electronics, book, food, housing, and financial assistance is helping me become a successful and stable adult. I believe we must give more youth this opportunity. Together, we can equip foster youth with the necessary resources and support to one day ensure that they lead successful and fulfilling lives. While I have authored several recommendations to Congress to reform the Chafee program and allow foster youth greater access to higher education, I am only highlighting one today. Congress must increase funding for the Chafee Grant to incentivize states to develop a more uniform approach. In creating a standard for how Chafee operates, Congress can then work towards expanding eligibility for youth not currently included. This can look like allowing youth who have spent more than 1 year in the foster care system, in addition to current requirements, the opportunity to access Chafee funds. In addressing these financial disconnects and reimagining how Chafee operates, we can significantly increase the number of foster youth attending and graduating with college degrees. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Glenda Wright, and I am Kinship Care. I stand before you today as someone society would deem a successful adult. I have 2 degrees, one of which is a law degree, and I am a proud small business owner with a long history of giving back and supporting my community. When people hear my story, the most common question is how, or what made a difference for you? I'm here to tell you that for me, that difference was my grandmother and her choice to step up and raise my 3 siblings and me, even at the detriment of herself. We've heard many testimonies here today and statistics that may have you believe that the 12 of us are up here due to some miracle or chance. That's just simply not the truth. We are here today because something or somebody made the difference for us, our lives, and our stories. Today, I hope you hear me when I say all of you in this room have the chance to be the difference in thousands of families' lives and stories, a positive and life-altering difference that can help change the trajectory of their lives for the better. If everyone would please indulge me, I'd like to ask everyone 3 questions. If the question applies to you, please raise your hand. Raise your hand if you can think of a loving and trusted adult besides your parents. If you trust that same adult to have raised you or your children, please keep raising your hand. Now, please keep your hand raised if you think that same person would have had the financial means and supports to care for and provide for you or your children without any sacrifice or limitation. Thank you everyone for participating. You all helped me. Thank you everyone for participating. You helped me demonstrate what kinship care could look like for thousands of families nationwide. Every family should have the opportunity to answer yes to all those questions. A country in which this happens is one that recognizes all families matter, regardless of their income bracket. To me, kinship care is when someone can step in and provide a loving and safe home for a child while their parents receive the necessary supports and services that they need to be an appropriate and nurturing caregiver. The government has a role in making this happen, in making kinship placements a viable option for all families. Officially, we define kinship care as the care of children by relatives or, in some jurisdictions, close family friends. It is a well-established fact in the child welfare field that kinship care should be the first option before entering care with a stranger, and kinship care is the best option for children when it comes to caregiving outside of their biological families. Even though we know that to be true, we have stalled when it comes to innovation in kinship care across this nation. Specifically, establishing and implementing a supported kinship care diversion model, or in other words, a mutual supported partnership where a biological parent or parents have agency to identify an appropriate, trusted kin to serve as their child's temporary caregiver. By us not having such a model in place, we are not utilizing what is undoubtedly a vital tool for reducing trauma for children and families while also creating better outcomes for children and families by keeping families together where they belong. That is why today I am recommending to Congress that they establish and allocate funding, very important, for the Department for Health and Human Services to establish and oversee a kinship care diversion model as outlined in my policy report. The child welfare system failed me, my siblings, and my grandmother by not having such a model in place. A failure that will unfortunately continue to be exacerbated for thousands of families in perpetuity unless the recommendations outlined in my policy report are implemented. Kinship care saved my life. My grandmother, her love, and my sibling connections made the difference for me. The child welfare system failed me, but it didn't have to. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all of our leaders and advocates for presenting today. As you'll see on the agenda, we know you have lots of questions and want to engage with our awesome presenters. And so we will turn to a Q&A portion of the briefing. And so my colleague Sarah is passing out mics to our advocates. For folks in the audience, if you would raise your hand, I'll repeat it into the mic best I can so we can preserve the audio for our recording. And we'll try and get through as many questions both in the room and then also from our live stream today. And so with that, we'll take our first question. All right.
So are you working with the CAPTA reauthorization? I'm Connie Regulate. I'm an attorney. I have an advocacy group for families across the United States, about 18,000 families. And we are up here, we have about 17 people up here right now. We've been stomping the halls, going in offices, and it's like looking for the white rabbit. It's like we cannot find the person who wants to grab this by the foot, and all we hear is, well, we may have to put a patch on it. And I said, patches are not okay. So tell me where you guys are and how we can help and what's going on with CAPTA reauthorization. I pulled the bill that was in the congressional record. I've gone through it. There's a lot of good things in there. It's not good enough, but tell me where the coalition is and what they're doing.
Sure. So for the group, the question is on CAPTA reauthorization and what some of the current advocacy is and how folks in the room can help uplift that. And so I know some of our advocates worked and had some recommendations on CAPTA, and so I'll invite any of our panelists to share a little bit on their thoughts on what CAPTA restructuring could look like. Looks like Eunice, you'll take the first one.
Hi, thank you. That is a very good question. I think during my research, one of the hardest things that I have found is that while CAPTA has been brought up through previous Congress, trying to get that support, which seems very hard and disheartening for me as someone who was not aware of my rights and responsibilities. And so I did have the privilege through this program to meet with local nonprofits and organizations like Keep Kids Safe, as well as meeting with members of the White House in order to discuss how abuse and treatment prevention can be enacted, specifically how we define trafficking and specifically how we have representation.
Would anyone else like to take a stab at that one? We can also chat more. We all have a reception immediately following, and I'd be happy to chat with you a little bit more and our staff about what the larger coalition is doing. All right, we'll go ahead and take our second question.
Hi. First of all, incredible presentations by everybody. It was really extraordinary, and I am grateful for your organization and putting this together and giving these opportunities for voice. And I'm just curious, what happens next? I'm interested in supporting each of these individuals and having their voice, and most importantly, moving them forward and allowing them the opportunity to continue to stay focused on the areas that they're interested in, knowing that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I'm just curious, is there an organization or organizations in DC that actually do this, which is, support system-impacted youth to continually lobby and lobbying organization.
Sure, thank you. So the question for the group is essentially, this was some amazing recommendations today. What comes next, and what are some ways that people in the room can continue to support our advocates and their recommendations? And so all of these recommendations are published in a report. It's on a QR code that's on your agenda, and so we encourage you to share that far and wide. Our advocates will also be on the Hill next week to meet with, there's 6 different teams, a full day packed to meet individually with members who have a vested interest in these topics. And so we'll be taking those recommendations to individual offices next week. We'll also be at the executive branch to share a little bit more on that. But I'd invite some of our panelists to hear a little bit about how folks in the room can support them in their future advocacy to make some of this happen. I see Glenda.
Hi, yes, really good question and an important question. I know for myself, sometimes we do different advocacy things and we don't see the actual results. For me, I've been privileged to be a professional advocate in this work for about 10 years. And I know for myself, I will be going and taking my policy report and working directly with my state, shout out to Kentucky, and we will be working to actually implement this on the state level to the best of our abilities. So that's where I go next. I would love to get traction here at the federal level, which is how other states benefit from programs. So that's what's next as far as my policy report and what I hope to see from it.
Awesome. I think Kayleen and then Isabel.
So I just wanted to thank you for that question. It's a really awesome question. But I think one of the main things that we need to do more of is just talking. I think that a lot of people have preconceived notions that the foster care system is, fine and well and things like that. And the thing is, that's not the case. And I think that we just need to continue to knock on doors and raise awareness and meet with policymakers, talk to family members, just keep talking until we get somewhere, because I think that there is a lot of work to be done. And I think that things can continue to be done, but we need to talk and we need to raise awareness and we need to come together as a group and start the fight for change, because I feel like together, everyone in this room, there are tons of things that we can do on a whole to support foster youth and just continue to make advocacy as much as possible. So.
First, Paul, I just want to thank you for being here. For those of you who don't know, Paul, who just asked this question, is a longtime supporter of foster youth and funded part of my education at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And so I'm just grateful for you being here and for all your dedication and support to supporting people, young people like us, which is why I'm not surprised that you asked this question about how you can do more. I just want to say how amazing it has been to be in a position with CCAI and all the work they do. We're doing this briefing, but again, it's not the last one. We briefed the White House, DHHS, we have private sector briefings. And so this is a great organization that I found in terms of advocating in DC on the Hill and taking it to that federal level. And like I said, this isn't where it ends. And there's been a lot of exposure, a lot of connections, a lot of kind of wraparound support for all of us here. And so I guess number one is you can always support CCAI and the youth that are here through mentoring, whatever that might look like. And one other organization that I'll highlight is the National Foster Youth Institute, which is also kind of based here, and they offer shadow day experiences and advocacy for foster youth in DC across the nation as well.
Yeah, to close that out, like Isabel said, though this program is for 9 weeks in the summer, CCAI does their advocacy year-round, and we continue to take these ideas into this year, into this Congress, into the years to come. And so these are the experts, and we take their ideas and help run with them, even if they're not physically in Washington with us. So we will then turn towards our third question, if we have one.
Hi, I'm Melina from Florida with the Henry's Forward Project. So I heard a little bit about the reunification. Once children are reunified, has there been any discussions? I hear the part about the education piece, but implementing things once children are reunified, pretty much it's okay, your kids are now home, bye-bye. Are there any discussions of coming in and helping that family to heal after the aftermath, so they are successful, that family is now successful so that child does get those supports, those families get those supports after the aftermath of those separations, to make sure that they are able to stay together and remain together and united so that they become productive to move on to higher education and the things that they need in society.
Sure. So the question is on reunification and what, if any, supports exist that help families that are reunified to support both them and the youth in their care. All right, Naomi.
Hi, so thank you for that question. I was reunified and then re-entered care 10 years later. So from my experience, a lot of reunification services are state by state, and a lot of that does fall to the fact that foster care system is not a federally regulated system. In most ways, a lot of it is state sovereignty, and a lot of states decide how they want to do those things. So specifically in Colorado, there were no reunification services, and once you pass the parenting test and pass the drug test, you get reunified, which obviously did not work out for me in the long run. But I think that an important part of the conversation, and I think part of what we're doing here is bringing our recommendations to our states and bringing our stories to our states to try to get those things implemented and to try to address those issues that unfortunately probably can't be addressed from a federal level without more involvement.
Faith, did you want to take a stab?
Always. Hi. I think it really comes down to the answer is state level advocacy and really having these conversations, and like post-adoption services are really something that's sort of new to the conversation, but they're also very important. And so I'd also like to highlight that we all have business cards. So at the reception, we will definitely be passing those out.
Awesome. Thanks, Faith. Lisette, I'll bump it to you to alternate and see if there's any question from the live stream. If not, we have plenty in the room. All right, perfect. Okay, I saw someone in the front.
My name is Debbie Arthur, and I'm the grandmother of 3 former foster children. And we spent hell on wheels out of the system, but we did success in that all right. And I'm so proud of every single one of you. We're with a family forward, and what we're trying to do is add some things to CAP, because that's the next major child welfare bill coming out. But one of my pet peeves is that we've got 2 major child welfare programs. One is Title 4E enhancement, and the other one is the Family Forward, or Family First Act, which we all worked with Wyden's office and Active office, not only to write, but to get passed. We were 18 months doing all the passes and pounding things, and it did. It passed. We were very thankful for it. But now we have 2 systems that have 2 different paths. Only 20 of the states have enacted the Family First Act. But when a child goes into a child welfare system now, if they qualify for Title 4E, because Title 4E is an entitlement, and only 4 children qualify for this entitlement. At entrance, 4 kids go into Title 4E, that has money for foster care. Non-kid kids get to go to Family Forward. There's already, for Family First, sorry, I just like in my speech, but bear with me because this is a huge issue. There's already such a poverty gap, for children who have bad outcomes. By having Title 4E being entitlement for only 4 children qualify for it, this is really causing a lot of problems. And we are trying to do that, and I would just like to know if there's any thoughts on other than we are really, really, really getting in there. We've seen tons of congressmen and senators who are so busy, and a lot of times, because of the staff turnover, it's the first time they've heard it. So is there any suggestions of what we could do to help with this? Or thoughts?
So
we seem to be stuck.
Yeah,
We've
we're
been
stuck
doing
with
this
that.
for 6
Sure.
years. We've been up here, I mean, 3 or 4 times a year, and sat in congressional offices, and I sat with Congressman Davis, and we have been saying this story, and then I pull up this missing foster care bill that they just introduced, this S 1146, and all they're doing is asking for a study and a report in 5 years. We can't keep doing this. There's 33,000 children a year missing in foster care. Children here are undocumented or flowing across the border. We don't even know where they are. So the time is now. Some people said that. I'm so grateful for that. But we have got to wrangle this cattle to the ground and make it happen.
Sure. So the question, I believe, stems from funding with Title IV-E and Family First. And I know many folks up here had recommendations for how that funding can either be reallocated or reformed to essentially improve better outcomes, which are really needed. And so if anyone wanted to answer that on funding and any ideas for what could push us forward. Jessica?
I think the sad reality is that it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work, and to continue to say, here we are, and it almost sounds pessimistic, but it's difficult, and all we can do is keep trying. I think all of us here, to a certain extent, have felt powerless, but all of us here and beyond this day are going to continue fighting for our policy reports. And going back to the question of like, what can we do, is continue to think of the nearly 440,000 foster youth who are in the system and who will continue to be in the system, and how it's a cycle. So as much as it's difficult to imagine that we have to work so hard, it has to be done. So I resonate with your sort of feeling of powerlessness and doing everything you can and feeling like it's getting nowhere, but it is getting somewhere. So thank you so much for the work you guys do, and I hope that you guys continue to sort of work in this work and seeing all of us as examples of it is possible, and there's people here who are thankful for your work. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. We'll go to Gianna for a second response.
Yeah, so I think two things are really key in this situation. It's accessibility and communication. So accessibility, expanding those eligibilities for that title would be obviously very beneficial to a lot of foster youth. As for the advocacy part, numbers bring power. So getting the most amount of people to be able to be public with their opinions and their ideas of what we should be doing, that's what brings the power, and that's what pushes the change. So going around, I think it was Paul that said, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It really is a marathon. So making sure that we're getting the most numbers we can to be able to push this change that I think everyone in this room knows we need is the key.
Great, thanks, Gianna. I think I saw you, there's a question from the back, yes.
This question is a follow-up for Faith and Idelia, because you both talked about the intersection between child welfare and youth homelessness, and it seems like both fields are doing a lot of the same things, like advocating for housing and like kinship care. So my question is actually curious to see what your thoughts are on how the two fields could strengthen their efforts.
Okay. I think first and foremost, it's getting the two to communicate effectively. I think child welfare and the housing system, especially with YHTP development, really needs more work. And I think as we continue in this space and having these conversations and looking at how everything intersects, I think we'll really start to see effective change.
And I'll just add to that I think cross-systems collaboration is something we talk about a lot in advocacy. I think we need to make sure that systems are working together to ensuring that youth have a smooth transition when they're aging out of foster care, or Faith talked about it earlier, is individuals who experience homelessness or have higher rates of having foster care experience. So it's how can we communicate across all youth serving systems, including mental health services, including juvenile justice, to making sure that we're all working towards a common goal, which is the best interest of young people.
I think we'll have time for just one or two more questions. Yes.
This question is for Isabel or anyone else who has, can talk about it, but Sibling connections is something I'm passionate about. I think it's a great human right here to do sibling separations. And so I was wondering, and whenever I ask people who bring it up, it's like who's kind of running the show? Like are there coalitions out there? Are there organizations? And have you seen the new American Bar Association's Sibling Connections Guide? It's a toolkit. It's wonderful. But have you come across any groups that are tackling this issue head on?
So I think this is a great question, and I'm glad you raised it. There are quite a few. I think the idea of sibling connections is something that's been building on lately. Like I said, people have been here before advocating for the same thing. Not a lot is changing, and it's not changing fast enough, clearly. But there are organizations or groups or policies in state-run programs that are creating change. For example, I know in New Jersey, they have SIBs. I can tell you what that means in the reception. But they have SIBs, which they have been able to get to where 80% of their foster youth are placed with at least one sibling, which we're looking at nationwide, 75% are not. So they clearly are making way, and we're not following structures that are being implemented like that. So my recommendation was to fund the development of a specialized foster care program that is evidence-based, could be based on SIBs, seeing it has a large success rate, that is focused on keeping siblings together, because there are so many impacts to the development of children when we, first of all, begin by separating them from their family, and then immediately follow that with exacerbating the trauma and separating them from their siblings. So that's just one example, and I'd be happy to talk about more of them with you in the reception.
All right, one last question maybe from this side. All right, we'll go ahead and then close it down. We will have a reception where we really encourage folks. I'm sorry, was there one more? Right here. Okay, sorry, we're gonna try and balance this room, or this side of the room. Yes.
I was just gonna ask for some concrete examples of how young people like yourselves, how us older folk can make more space for you all, and where that should be, and what that should look like, so that your voices are more amplified and heard, and your recommendations are actually followed. And you don't have to in another 5 years come back and have the same recommendation.
Okay, it looks like Glenda, you'd like to. And the question is on how can folks in the room, older folks in the room, kind of make space for advocates, coming up with some great recommendations.
Okay, this is a favorite of mine. So I was fortunate enough to be in Kentucky, where we have a paid advocacy group starting at the age of 16. So I joined at 17. And so I've been a paid advocate in that way. We funnel that through what's DCBS in Kentucky, but is kind of HHS here. And then it's funneled to not private, but a public university. And then that public university is in charge of going out and finding the youth and supporting the youth. So then there's a separation between DCBS. So that's one really cool way. I actually joined my DCBS commissioner's office for 2 years and was paid very well to be a built-in advocate. And I think that's the starting point, because the change happens at HHS, at DCBS in Kentucky. And so if there's not a credible placement for youth and there's not credible voice being heard, it's not enough to just keep creating these little committees, and then we go and we speak on our stories and we give the trauma stuff, and then nothing's done, or it's done to target different things that weren't meant for our voices. And so really just making sure we go back to Idelia's point of really doing the voice right and not just for tokenism. So I think that's ultimately where it starts, is challenging programs to make sure they're not just having these youth go out and talk, and they're actually paying them and embedding them all throughout their programs. And that's where it happens, and that's how change happens.
Awesome. All right, we'll have a closing comment from Eunice.
Thank you so much for this question. I'll try to keep it short and brief. By saying that I basically aged out of the system about 2 years ago, and I had no idea that a program like this existed. I had no idea that something like this at all even existed. I didn't even know that the Chafee program existed. And so when you're trying to get voices, obviously it needs to be authentic. It needs to be people who have the experience, who have done that. But how do you get that, right? You're not going to find a foster youth in a congressional office 9 times out of 10. You're going to find somebody who has the means to get in here, right? You're not going to find a foster youth, you're not going to find them it's not like you can pick and choose and decide what a foster youth looks like. You have to go into these communities, you have to be honest, you have to be open, and you have to be willing to listen, and you have to realize how, if you really want that change, if you really want youth to be the ones to take on this work for you, you need to go and make sure it's accessible. Because I could not do this program if I did not have the funds, because I would be homeless. I could not do this program if I wasn't mentally prepared. Like, I could not do this program, given everything that I've been through in the system, and stand in front of each and every one of you if there was not that accessibility. So always think about that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Eunice. And let's give one last round of applause for our amazing cohort. So thank you all for joining us today to hear from our 21st class of program participants in the Foster Youth Internship Program. I would like to give a few thank yous. So first to our leaders of the Board of Directors, Russ Sullivan, who leads our FYI program on the board, is with us today. We also have many faithful partners. We give special thanks to the American Council of Life Insurers, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Apollo Global Management, Arnold and Porter, Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, who also hosts us every Tuesday night, and a bunch of their core team is here. So thank you to Brownstein. We'd also like to thank the Carlson Family Foundation, the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, Constellation, Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, Retail Orphan Initiative, and the Walter S. Johnson Foundation. We also give special thanks to the awesome team of Child Focus for helping make this report possible as our report directors. So thank you to Rebecca and Kathleen. We also have some of our amazing FYI program alum in the room. I've spotted Melvin and Haley. A bunch are on the live stream, so we appreciate you supporting your fellow colleagues. We also have some of our individual FYI mentors in the room, so thank you all for providing that guidance for our leaders as they're in Washington. And lastly, a very, very special shout out to the amazing staff of CCAI, Lisette, Sarah, and Toria. We really appreciate you. Simply, this program could not happen without our amazing staff. We also have a pretty strong team of office interns. So we have Lily, who's on the photography. We also have Lily, who's on our live stream. We have Maheen, and also Emma is around here somewhere. So thank you all for spending your summer with us. Last bit of thanks is really to the class of 2023. Thank you for raising your voices towards a better future and removing barriers, expanding equitable access, improving outcomes, and ensuring that children, youth, and families do not experience what you experienced. Thank you again, everyone. Before we turn to the reception, I'd now like to welcome Eunice Mejade and Faith Sharp to the podium to give some final closing remarks on behalf of the class.
Thank you again for joining us today. My name is Faith Sharp.
And my name is Eunice Mejade. Thank you, Congress, CCAI, and those who have contributed to us being here today. Child welfare is a critical bipartisan issue that members from both sides can agree needs to change. Crucial legislation like Family First Prevention Service Act has shown that change is possible and that the importance of lived experiences belong at the forefront. Experiences like ours are only a slither of the reality that is the system.
While our faces may change from class to class, barriers remain that are still insurmountable. I am reminded of a quote from Albert Einstein, where he defines insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Changing the child welfare system won't come from doing the same things we have done for years before. It will be arduous work, but I charge you to find comfort in the uncomfortable.
As we learn from the past, we aim to create a world where all youth feel protected,
We hope you take both the pain and success within our recommendations to reevaluate your approach to child welfare reform. We have discussed issues from trafficking to kinship placement to Chafee funding to provide solutions to modern welfare policies that overlook youth like us. While we have different perspectives, this cohort has come together for 9 intensive weeks to share our stories and craft recommendations that we wish were implemented to improve our time during the system. We know change must happen now, not tomorrow or the next year, but today. If not, we are doomed to be in the state of repeating the same old with the same unsatisfactory results. This work will require all of us, from the people in this room to the constituents on the streets, and most importantly, the youth who know firsthand how the system operates.
I hope you will return to your congressional districts and states and treat the foster youth population as the constituency that we are, with better policy and better futures. Thank you, and we invite you to join us now at the reception.